Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So this time on the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm really happy to be welcoming Abel van Staveren, who is a location-independent portfolio careerist and a sailor, according to his LinkedIn profile description. We wanted to get him on the show as a great model of how you can create your own career with pretty much all the elements you might want to dream of or imagine, with the only limitation really being your imagination. Abel, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks very much for having me, Claire.
Wonderful. So let's start, as we usually do, with your career journey. You've been through a number of pivots and challenges in your career, starting off in London, first in audit, and then as the CFO and then CEO of shipping companies. You added an extra dimension as an academic, and soon also some non-executive board positions. And over the past 15 years, you've also been building a company that does the things you love: investing, consulting, and coaching. And your biggest passion is life design for yourself and for your clients. Why don't you tell us how this amazing career unfolded, and talk about whether it was by design or serendipity, or probably a mix of both, and also talk us through some of the achievements and moments of pride, as well as the challenges along the way.
I would like to think it's very much by design. However, I'm reminded of what Egon Zehnder said, the founder of the headhunting firm, when asked what his key to success was. And he just replied, luck, which is not very helpful, if people are looking
That's
for
so
tips.
like Egon,
But then I'm also reminded, as a very terrible golfer, I'm reminded of what the famous golfer Jack Nicklaus said. He said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. So I think that's very much where I get my handholds from. So I started out, with an undergrad business degree, which majored in marketing. And I got some junior marketing roles. And I thought to myself, I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life. I need to learn a trade. And that's, I bumped whilst on business travels in the Baltic states of all places. I bumped into this audit team from this English firm. And I thought, that looks interesting. And I applied. The competition for these roles are so intense. I thought, don't have any chance. But then, as you say, serendipity plays a role. I got an interview in London. So I got on the EasyJet from Amsterdam. And it was a couple of days when the IRA decided they would bomb London. But I had no clue about that. I just turned up. But all the other candidates didn't. So and the firm thought, well, this is a tenacious guy. But I was absolutely oblivious to what's going on. So there you go. Luck plays a bit of a role. But they said to me, because in my marketing roles, I already was working for shipping and logistics companies. And they said to me, well, we have all the processes in place to turn you into an accountant. But it's much harder for us to turn our accountants into shipping specialists. And that's what they were. This was a firm specializing in shipping. So that got me on to that. And what I realized was, I had quite a, what I would say, meteoric career as an auditor, if you can call it that. First of all, I had to take a 50% pay cut, hand back the company car from my marketing job. And then it's a bit of a culture shock because in your first year as a trainee auditor, you're back in charge of the photocopier and the coffee machine. That's kind of the breadth of your responsibilities. What I realized was, as you would say, a stereotypical accountant is not that commercially minded. We went out on these audits, and there's a section on the audit file which says points for partners' attention. And all my colleagues would put in bits like, there are some payroll risks because their payroll is a mess and we should really be worried about this. And instead, I used that section to write to the partner, their payroll is a mess. I think we should send in our payroll people and maybe sell some payroll services, or their tax is a mess. To me, with a marketing background, that seemed obvious. The only job of the partner is to go to lunch with the clients in a couple of weeks' time and to cross-sell services. So they loved me. So within, a short I would say in the land of the blind, one eye is king. My whole career is based on that principle. I was running audits within no time. That worked very well for me. From there on, they thought, oh, this chap can think standing up. That's good. So I got some challenging audits, and I also got parachuted into some difficult scenarios at clients where we needed some sensible thinking. And in the end, I ended up joining one, a shipping company, as financial controller, and then moved on to CFO from there. And the rest is history. I still do work for this shipping company like 25 years later, but not as an employee anymore. That was very cool. So that's kind of my early career. And that set me up. So I would say in terms of moments of pride, qualifying as a chartered accountant, I still look at that as a significant milestone, becoming that professional. And that set me up for an international career. I also looked at which accounting qualification has kind of the highest, call it status worldwide. And the British chartered accountancy qualification is up there. And that allowed me to have that international career. And also, of course, progressing through the ranks and eventually getting the corner office, as they say. That's also, I would say, a career milestone. But then, the other side of that same coin, I would say my biggest challenge is the impossible job of being a CEO. The problems that are solvable get solved by somebody else in the organization, and all the unsolvable problems end up on your desk. I naively thought that once you have that role, you also have the power to deal with the responsibilities of that role. And that is hardly never the case. I have a lot of respect for people in those jobs now. And then I think my second biggest challenge is career change, and especially dealing with fear, especially if you've been successful and you've had good career progression, then making a change to something completely different is not logical and can be the source of many, many sleepless nights.
Indeed. And that borderline between the do I stay or do I change, of course, brings up the notion of what got you here definitely won't get you there. And we'll be coming on to more examples of that as we go on. Thinking back to these, relatively traditional areas that you worked in the first half of your career, what lessons have you learned along the way, and how have you applied those lessons in the second half of your career?
Two stand out. The first one is what I refer to as skill stacking. As I touched on, the combination of the auditing skills with my commercial skills made me stand out as a junior accountant. I got this from what many people say is the most quoted business writer living today, a chap called Scott Adams. And I think, Scott Adams, never heard of him. Well, he's actually the creator of the Dilbert cartoon.
Absolutely. We quote him in our book too. He's a pretty amazing guy, isn't he?
Yeah. And he worded it very nicely. He said, look, what are the chances of you and me winning a gold medal at the next Olympics? Well, that's pretty minimal, if I speak for myself at least. And so trying to be the best in your chosen field is very hard. You're competing with 7 billion other people on the planet. But you don't need to do that. You just need to be top quartile at two different things, at least, and combine them. And being top quartile is doable in a certain field or area of expertise. And he gave himself as an example. He said, look, I'm not the best artist in the world. Dilbert is pretty simple, but I can barely scrape by as a top quartile cartoonist. I'm not the best joke writer in the world, but I can just scrape by in the top quartile. And my third skill is that I actually worked as a software engineer in a cubicle at Bell Labs for the early part of my career. By combining those three things, he became the most syndicated cartoonist on the planet. And he's a billionaire.
Yeah.
But he was not the best in any of those three skills. Yeah. And the same for me. I wasn't the best accountant, and I was definitely not the best marketeer. But combining those two made me stand out and made me very successful early on in my career and set me up for my later career. So skill stacking, I would say to people.
I'm curious, when did you have that moment of clarity about, hey, this thing that Dilbert said, that applies to me and I can make something of it? Is this 20/20 hindsight, or was it during?
Yes. So I saw the power of it. I didn't know it had a name. I saw early on that, by being slightly different. And I was always, I came in as of the 20 trainees at this very traditional firm, which kind of, if you remember the British series, Are You Being Served? This British accountancy firm looked exactly like that. Mm. And I came in as this young Dutch guy. I was already different, but I thought that's an asset. So I looked at that and skill stacked that a bit. And it's only when much later I read Scott Adams' book. I think the title is something like How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big. That's his book. And I thought, yes, that's the name for the thing I've been doing all the time. The other lesson is something that this old grizzled headhunter told me once. He said, in his view, successful careers have 3 phases. And the first phase is the experience phase, where you just have to learn your craft, whatever that is. And, that's sometimes not a lot of fun. As I said, I've done my time at the photocopier and all that. And then once you're good at that, you get promoted and you graduate into the second phase, which is the leadership phase. That's where you have to teach your craft to others, to mentor, to lead, whatever. And you can go quite far, all the way to the C-level in that phase. And that's where most careers stop. But if you keep your eyes and ears open, you might graduate into the third phase. And that's what I call the freedom phase. Or he called the freedom phase. And the freedom phase is that you become so good at what you do that you can start dictating terms. And the terms kind of fall into 2 main buckets, time and money. And they're, to a large extent, interchangeable. I always remember that. And then I thought, how do I get to that freedom phase as quickly as possible? And for a long, long time in my corporate life, I had no clue how, until this portfolio career option came up. And that's, for me, my way of doing the freedom phase.
Fantastic. Well, that brings us very neatly then to the question of how the transition began and happened. It's undoubtedly clear that you have this big dichotomy. You were a corporate employee, you're now a portfolio careerist. I'm fascinated for you to talk about how you created the vision, how you explored your options, what triggered the change, and what were the challenges and triumphs in building that new way.
It came out of fear. So I kind of think you have 2 basic emotions, love and fear. I was motivated by fear. Earlier on, still in my corporate career, my wife and I, we were working in London and then in Singapore. My father-in-law passed away when he was 58. So he never lived to see retirement, even though he had big plans for retirement. He wanted to go sailing, but he never got to do that. And we said to ourselves, that's not going to happen to us. We don't know how long we have, but we better do all the things we want to do before then. But we had no clue how or where to start. And basically, it reached kind of a breaking point. I remember we both had to travel a lot for work. And one Christmas, we were sitting across from each other at Christmas dinner, both completely jet lagged out of our brains, had been flown in from somewhere. We started counting how many weeks we'd seen each other that year. And we came to 10. We'd seen each other 10 weeks that year. We said to each other, our marriage won't last if we continue this kind of, we need to change. And I'd done an executive MBA at INSEAD and looked at, then you get to meet so many other people and see what they're doing. These MBAs, they only give you really 2 options. They help you with 2 options. They either help you on the one end, scale the corporate ladder, or on the other hand, entrepreneurship. And I looked at these 2 extremes and I said, well, none of them will get me into this freedom phase. They both look extremely risky to me. And then we heard about this thing, we got taught this thing in class called Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yep.
I think this is neat. Can I apply this to my career, to my life? And there was this great example. We've all heard about Cirque du Soleil, right? And Cirque du Soleil is a great Blue Ocean Strategy example where they take the best of a circus, clowns and acrobats, the best of a theater, quite posh, high end, and there's a storyline in the whole performance, and there's food and catering and stuff like that, wine. They avoid the worst of both. The worst of a circus was animals, high cost, and you're sitting in a drafty tent. And the worst of a theater being it's only in one place. So your addressable market is small. So they combined both. They created a theater experience with clowns and acrobats that moves around, right, okay. So can I do the same and take the best of employment, reoccurring income, for instance, stability, and the best of entrepreneurship, choosing your clients, being flexible, being able to scale up or scale down your workload. And that's how I kind of stumbled across this portfolio career to get the best of both employment and get me into this freedom phase. The word portfolio, I think, is borrowed from finance, portfolio theory. It avoids concentration risk. As an employee, you suffer from immense concentration risk. All your income comes from one source, and maybe your pension and your bonus and your stock options as well. So that's like going into the stock market and just buying one stock. No, that's not advisable. You want to diversify. So that's what a portfolio career can do. And actually, I would say now with a portfolio career, it's much less risky than being an employee, which kind of might feel counterintuitive to people thinking about it.
Well, yes, that's definitely a debate. The days of guaranteed jobs for life are certainly gone. So the risk profiles definitely do shift. That's for sure.
Yeah, the psychological contract between employer and employee is broken. The idea was the employee dedicates all his time and effort to the job. In return, the employer gives salary, benefits, and job security. Well, what's the saying? Companies were once built like pyramids, but they're now built like tents. That's kind of where we are.
Same sort of shape, but otherwise not very similar. Yes. Nice comparison. So let's think then. You've built up this global career with all kinds of different facets. And you've ended up in what many people still see as quite an unconventional career life. But if you were to build on the personal learning and your experience of having done this, what advice would you give to early career professionals who are looking to start out?
First of all, like the 3 phases we talked about before, that could be an interesting framework to think through. Where am I and what do I need to do? One thing I would like to give, especially younger people, is when we look at career change, we tend to look inward. What skills do I need? What do I need to do? And all that. One thing, and it might sound blindingly obvious, but one thing is choose an industry which is growing and a company in that industry which is growing. If the industry pie is growing, it's much easier for the company to increase its slice, and within the company for you to get promoted. To get promoted in a shrinking company in a shrinking industry, it's just so hard. Whereas the other way around, you just need to show up basically and not mess up and just be there and stay there, and then you float to the top nearly automatically. Well, that's a bit of a simplification, but it's true though. And so please, rather than doing this kind of self-examination and what do I need to do, what courses do I need to do, and just make sure you're in a growing company within a growing industry. That will make all the difference. That's one point. The other thing is get a mentor. Can't stress that enough. And ideally get 2. I've always had 2 as I went through my career. One inside the company, one outside the company. And they give the different perspectives. And the one inside the company, I would only say, don't choose a mentor in your direct reporting line up. Choose somebody
too uncomfortable. Yeah.
Because then there are no conflicts of interests and things like that. And also, be ambitious. Go as high as you can in the organization to find your mentor. And so people sometimes say to me, yeah, but, would they want to make time for me? And think about, well, you'd be surprised. Because what I found is early in your career, you like to network up. You like to kind of get connections high up in your organization. When you're high up in the organization, you actually want to network down.
You want to know what's going on down there. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to know what the younger people and the next generations think. So, you'd be surprised. If you ask somebody quite senior, would you like to be my mentor? They probably will say yes.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's a second point to add there that can be very valuable in boosting the confidence of a younger employee looking for that senior mentor. And that is that we're all hardwired to love flattery. And so if the more junior person comes along with humility and sincerity and genuine curiosity and really is wanting to pick the brain of that person, then, there's nothing better for a human being psychologically, neuropsychologically, than to be treated as the expert, the oracle. And so, yes, nobody can take on 20 mentees, but if you pick carefully, then it's not as difficult as it might appear.
I mentor some people and I get just as much out of it as they do. I learn.
Anything else on that topic, or can we talk about your board work?
Board work, yeah.
Great, fantastic. So you've got a variety of roles on boards. Why don't you talk to us, first of all, about what feels important to you in these non-executive positions? And then also, it would be great if you can share some of your advice on how to build these into the mix of a career.
Well, so, variety is the spice of life. So these board positions are very diverse. On the one hand, you add value, you mentor, but you also learn at the same time. What you see in one board, you can transfer to another board. So it's very clear how you add value. And it fits very nicely now into my location-independent life. Before COVID, I still had to go to board meetings a lot, but that's all disappeared. Before COVID, I had to convince clients that we can do this virtually. That's all gone away. Everybody is very happy to Zoom, but meeting physically is still helpful once or twice a year, but not all the time. So it's a nice fit for me in my portfolio career where I am. In terms of how to build up a board portfolio, well, I get that question a lot, and it's multiple things you can do. First of all, if you're still in a corporate role, I would already try and secure board positions as side hustles. I often get back, well, my contract doesn't permit me to do other work. Well, I would challenge that, actually. The non-compete shouldn't extend to that, unless, avoid going on the board of a direct competitor and things like that, of course. But other than that, I think you should give it a go. What I think is the good news is boards are professionalizing. So it's no longer Basil from the Rotary Club that will ask to be on the board because he's a good egg. No, thankfully, that time is gone. So that means, getting some kind of qualification is helpful. So I would recommend joining the Institute of Directors. Many jurisdictions and countries have something like that. Do a board course, non-executive board course. There are many. And also it's a good network, these places. But of course, that's the name of the game. Network like crazy. I have to mention that. But getting your first one is always tricky. So what I did some pro bono board positions to get experience. So I joined the board of a theater school in Singapore. It was a charity, but it was also incorporated as a company. And the board consisted mainly of theater people. So they just needed somebody that could count on the board. That was my added value. The other thing that worked for me is that I turned consultancy into a board position, where a small and medium-sized company, they wanted to do some M&A, and they wanted to hire me as a consultant to do that. At the same time, I was trying to build up my board portfolio, and I don't like doing this kind of hourly consultancy work. So I said to them, instead of me being a consultant, I just join your board as a non-exec for a fixed fee, and you get the same advice, only I'm on the board. And they said, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So that was another way I managed to turn a consultancy gig into a board position. Then another thing that works for me is internal boards. So if you're still in a corporate career and you're in a large company, these large companies tend to have many subsidiaries, many jurisdictions, and they all need boards.
Yep.
They are internal boards. And what often happens is, in their foreign subsidiary, they need a local resident board member, and they get their company secretarial firm or a law firm to deliver a board member. And I've seen this. And then at the board meeting, the lawyer turns up, has no meaningful contribution to the board meeting, sits there on his or her phone the whole time, and sends a huge invoice for the privilege. So I said internally to the powers that be, and said, we can do this differently. I'm a local resident in the jurisdiction that you need a local board member.
Yeah.
I'll be on your board instead. And they said, and we'll save a lot of money. And they said, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So I got on internal boards as well. And I would say last but not least, it does help having some C-level experience. as a board member, you are mentoring, directing, evaluating the C-suite. Having been in the trenches in a C-level position, knowing how impossible that job is helpful. But then again, at the same time, I go, yeah, well, that's easy for you. You had these C-level roles. Okay, well, you immediately think I have to be the CEO of some Fortune 500 company or Unilever or something. No. Small and medium-sized business, same. The work is just as difficult and just as whether you add a number of zeros behind all the numbers or not. So I think that definitely helps. Oh, and also I tried getting board positions too early in my career. Gray hair helps.
No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. It's not a piece of career advice that we can give to the 25-year-old graduate who's just starting out, apart from be patient. Okay, so let's think about how you've designed your life. As you did your own design and as you advise others on how to do the same, what sort of steps do you like to recommend? And what other wisdom in general can you share about your particular brand of life design?
We're talking about career change and radical career change, but taking a step back, a career should be a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to live, hopefully, a fulfilling and meaningful life, however that is defined for you. And that's different for everybody. And career plays a big role in that. But let's not take our eyes off the prize. Yeah, how it started for us was my wife and I looked at each other and said, what can we do? Well, what we've been doing is our very limited skill set is that we know how to run companies. Let's apply that to life. Let's run our life like a company. Yeah, that sounds a bit nerdy, but look at your life as a social enterprise with a triple bottom line. Whereas a social enterprise needs to make some money to finance its operations, but the social goal is to live a happy, meaningful, fulfilling life. So we said, okay, let's do that. So we started having board meetings, the two of us, and we do a strategy away weekend every year. Where we go to a nice resort, away from all the day-to-day. We even ask the hotel sometimes to put a flip chart in our room, because otherwise we don't feel like we're doing it properly. And we set our goals. We evaluate our goals from last year. We learned how to set kind of SMART goals. We learned that as well in our business school training. That was the start. And then we learned about design thinking. And we take a design thinking approach to life design. What is design thinking? It's basically experimentation. Fail fast, fail cheaply, learn, iterate, repeat. So you create small, cheap experiments. So you don't quit your day job and try something else for 100. No, that's very risky. And we're both accountants. We don't like risk. We do it in small bits. And, remember years ago reading the book Working Identity by Professor Herminia Ibarra.
For sure.
And it takes time to shift working identities. And you can't outthink yourself into a new career by sitting in a corner. You have to create experience to experience stuff. So that's what we do. We said, okay, well, this sounds interesting. How do we create an experiment to test it? For me, for instance, I thought teaching sounded interesting. How can I create an experiment with a teaching gig next to my day job at the time so that I could test it out? But even, the sailing, before we went out and bought a sailboat, we did many sailing holidays, rented boats, got on sailing courses and things like that. So that, I think, is the main thrust of it, and do it gradually. It took me 5 years to transition from full corporate to full portfolio career.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to do that is I just started side hustles next to my day job.
Yeah.
And the way to start there is realizing that, well, hang on a minute, my contract says 40 hours a week. Here I'm doing 60 hours a week. Why don't I start doing 40 hours a week and freeing up some time for my side hustles? I still stayed in the office, but I was working on my own projects.
Yeah, very crafty.
And I even bought one of these plastic screens on my computer monitor that you can only see it from the front, so that people could peek at what I was doing. And I said, look, I'm doing confidential finance stuff. I can't. So
cunning as a fox. Okay.
Yeah. But the thing is, nobody noticed, which made me feel a bit stupid for working all those long hours all those years.
Yeah.
It starts paying off, and then you do more and more side hustles to the point where doing your day job becomes extremely hard. And then you reach this jump off point. What do you do? And again, fear comes into it. I sat on the edge of that cliff probably for 2 years before I had the guts to jump off. And finally, I thought, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen, I try this, I fail miserably and go back to corporate. And I might not go back at the same level I left, but maybe within a couple of years, I'll be back where I was. Well, if that's the worst that can happen, maybe I should give it a go. It took me a couple of years talking to myself before I jumped.
Wonderful. So you manage your risk all along the way, like a good auditor. Let's switch into today. Tell us about your typical day-to-day life as a digital nomad. Can you describe a typical average day?
There is really no structure. My portfolio career now consists of 3 income streams. I run an investment fund, private equity fund of funds. That's about 1 day a week, I would say, but it's not dedicated one day. It's kind of daily emails and calls and stuff like that, but it adds up to about 1 day a week. My board portfolio, that's probably another day a week. And then the coaching and the teaching is another day a week. And that's it, basically, 3 days a week. That's where I'm at the moment. And in the winter, when we're not sailing, I scale up a bit. I do more coaching and teaching. And in the summer, when we're sailing, I scale down a bit. And with 3 days a week, income-wise, I'm nearly the same as where I was when I left full-time corporate. So you can optimize. So that's kind of what the typical, the priorities are now more with the non-work, non-career side of things, the sailing really. But now in the winter, we have more of a shore-based life, and then we do more. That's the beauty of a portfolio career. And in the beginning, you just say yes to everything, right? Beggars can't be choosers, as they say. But then after a while, when you get a lot more work, you can start being pickier and start doing more what you want to do, more that fits in the lifestyle you want to have. That's kind of where we are. And in terms of the freedom and the traveling, we went through a couple of phases. Now it's more sailing, but we did the kind of nomadic traveling all the time. But that was very tiring. We're spending half your time on logistics. Then we split the year up into 4 times 3 months. But if I would say what the trend is, we're becoming slow mads rather than digital nomads. It's slowing down. We're still traveling full time, but we're staying put longer in various places.
And perhaps more defined destinations as well, if I read between the lines.
Yes, once you've been to a lot of places, you now find you tend to go back to the places you like. And also, you tend to value community more. So you tend to go back to places where you have a community.
Wonderful. So let's go way back to 18-year-old Abel. And what advice would you want to give him if you could go back there and be his wise sage mentor?
Again, I think the theme is be less scared. Try stuff. If I had been less scared, I probably could have done this much faster. And especially looking back, you probably didn't think so at the time. But when you're younger, you have maybe less responsibilities, less commitments, and therefore can take more risks.
Less to lose. Absolutely.
And the other thing is the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed, meaning that there's somebody out there already doing what you want to be doing. And therefore, you just have to find them and have a coffee with them. I didn't realize this until much later as well, that you can just find some. And generally, I would say 9 times out of 10, people are happy to talk to you and share. So this concept of digital nomads, I heard about one and then I thought, oh, what's this about? And then I just contacted them. And what are you doing? And started hanging out at these co-working spaces where digital nomads hang out. And I think, oh, okay. So you can find your tribe.
Indeed. So very important. Now, we usually end up with a question around something about, what are your most exciting projects for the next 12 months? And as I look at that question and think about asking you, my immediate sense is that you might very well say, well, actually not that much that's exciting or different, because it's probably going to be more of the same. But do tell me what joys you're hoping to be finding in the next year or so.
One of the KPIs is to increase our sailing days. We're weather restricted now. It's getting too cold. We switch the heater on and maybe we should try and put in some sailing days in some warmer climes, but we haven't figured out how to do this yet. We like sailing Northern Europe in the summer, but how can we put some more sailing days in the winter somewhere? And there are different ways of doing that. And again, business concepts, make or buy, rent or borrow. What do we do? So we're strategizing around that. But in terms of what is probably more interesting in terms of pivotal career change, we're at a stage of life where we're probably going to transition more from portfolio career to FIRE. So if your listeners are not familiar with FIRE, it stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. We can do a whole different podcast on that. That is shifting your active income to passive income, how to build returning assets and things like that. This whole idea that, I have to work until I'm 65. Why? Who made up that number? Is there a law for that? Why not earlier? You're saving up through pensions or other ways to retire at 65 anyway, turning your active income into passive income. Everybody is doing this, but why 65 or 67? Why not 60? Why not 50? So that, I think, is the journey for the next 12 months. Yeah, the transition from portfolio career to FIRE.
Fantastic. Well, perhaps we should have another podcast on that subject another day. But in the meantime, Abel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on board for the time that we've spent today. You've opened, I'm sure, the audience's eyes to all kinds of different possibilities, and I found it a great pleasure to hear you doing that. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.